Since he took up his position as the government's planning minister last year, the Conservative MP Nick Bowles has been on a mission to sort out the UK's housing shortage, and fundamental to his plan is the building of new houses on greenbelt land. He says we'd only need to build on another 2 or 3% of land in England to solve the housing problem entirely, because about 9% of England is all that's built on at the moment. Of course, not everyone agrees. Yesterday, Mr Bowles stated his case at an annual meeting of the Campaign to Protect Rural England, CPRE, and ended up being called a liar and a fool. The countryside campaigners blame the housing problems on developers failing to build on plots which they already have planning permission for. No, said Mr Bowles, that's not the case. It's actually because of a deep reluctance to release countryside land for new development. And his ideas, as you can hear from this clip of his speech, were met with heckles.
All kinds of housing will become more affordable. We can't just focus on subsidised.
Untrue. It's untrue. And it's about time you listen to other people.
People shouted liar at him, apparently. Nick Bowles also said that villages need some noise, his phrase, in the form of younger people, and that fighting against new builds in rural areas would turn villages into museum exhibits. In the past, he's described some new housing estates as pig ugly, but he thinks better designs on greenfield land could even enhance the landscape. Perhaps the idea of covering a further 3% of lush green countryside with housing fills you with dread, or maybe you applaud Mr Bowles for taking a stand. So today we're asking, is this the best planning minister we've ever had? We're joined by the chief executive for the Campaign to Protect Rural England, Shaun Spiers, and on the line by Charles Moore, former editor of The Telegraph and columnist for The Spectator. And Charles, I know you've got a bit of sympathy with what Mr Bowles is saying.
That's right, Jeremy, I do, and I say that as a countryman. I brought up in the country and I'm speaking to you from it now, and I feel very strongly that we have to think about the next generation, and it's simply become, in the south of England at least, utterly unaffordable for people with what you might call ordinary working jobs and young people to own or even rent a house. And that means that the country life is dying. And it may look pretty, but death is never ultimately a pretty thing, and that's the way we're going.
Is there not, though, an issue with new builds being out of keeping with those villages we're talking about, and they will destroy them just by being built? Well,
I think it's terrible that people are so pessimistic about what you can build. I mean, it's so self-defeating. If you don't put your heart into it, you won't build something that you love. All villages were once greenfield sites, but many of them built beautifully, and they didn't necessarily build expensively to build beautifully. But we've got in such, we must be the only country in the world where a minister is attacked for being a builder, attacked for being somebody who wants new houses for the population. Country life is, as its name suggests, it's about life, and if we believe in that life, we can build beautifully for it.
Shaun Spiers, what do you say to that?
Well, I don't think anybody's disagreeing that we need more homes in the countryside, and certainly CPRE isn't. The reasons for the heckling was about the way of getting it and the scale of the building that Nick Bowles is proposing.
Well, he's talking about building enough homes, and you think that's too many?
No, it's not that. I think we want a beautiful and living countryside, and we've called for many more homes to be built. There's an interesting piece today in the Times by Gabby Hinsliff where she's sort of guiltily talking about opposing a development near her village, and she says the villages around her, the half dozen villages, could do with 70 houses. Well, it might be they could do with 170, I don't know, the area. But what she says is that actually the builders would want to build 70 houses outside one village, a big estate because it's cheap, on greenfield site because it's cheap, and that's the way the system works. And it would be one of the mass builders who, for whatever Charles says, on the whole, haven't built particularly beautifully in recent years. And I think Nick and the government need to look more closely at the nature of the housing market, why it is that small and medium-sized builders have shrunk in their market share from 2/3 to 1/3 in 30 years, why indeed people can't just hire a builder to build their own homes. But they're putting all their effort into saying half a dozen big companies should build lots and lots of houses to reduce house prices and hit their profits. They're not going to do it.
Yes, well, the reason that it's so expensive and difficult to build is because of planning permission, because that restricts it, and therefore the price of land is absolutely phenomenal. Housing land is absolutely phenomenal, and therefore it's way beyond the capacity of a normal person. The big builders, by the way, have quite an incentive to preserve this planning permission because it makes it much easier for them to crowd out the smaller operators, and it means that they get a bit bigger premium in the price. So it's not true to say that they have a massive interest in building lots more houses. The people.
No, I say they don't have a massive interest. The government are putting all their money on the big builders. So the big builders have very big profits. They have very high yields, and they've got no incentive to build lots of houses.
Well,
exactly. But what they're doing now,
This
Charles, is they're building them on greenfield sites, not in towns.
If you were allowed to build much more freely, then there wouldn't be any premium on the site. And it's not automatically the case that something put on a greenfield site is unattractive. I think, in fact, a lot more careful thought about the choice of such sites and more confidence in building would be a positive advantage rather than the dreadful infilling you get of mean little houses that are just developed because they fit into tiny little holes.
Well, we're getting somewhere here, aren't we? Because if we could move away from a situation where, as Shaun describes, a builder buys a field and sticks a load of cheap houses and they look terrible on it, Shaun, get to a situation where you can buy land cheaply and build whatever you want on it, then individuals will do that and they'll build more houses and they'll be more in keeping. How about that?
Yeah, well,
really relax, majorly relax planning laws.
No, we wouldn't want to do that because with the campaign to protect rural England, I don't actually think Charles would.
But then you end up with the situation you've got now, which is what you're describing.
No, not at all, because the idea that house prices are expensive because land is expensive, you could equally argue that land is expensive because house prices are expensive. I mean, there is a complex relationship between these two.
No,
and the fact of the matter is that, and Charles can't argue with this,
that's not the case.
The fact of the matter is that when this country built enough houses, the state built half of them. For 30 years after the Second World War, more than half the homes we built were built by the state. When the state stopped building, the assumption was the private sector would pick up and build more. They simply haven't.
But I still don't understand. I'll come back to you in a second, Charles. But Shaun, explain to me why you don't want the planning laws relaxed so that everyone can build their house, not just big building firms whose houses you don't like.
Because you'd end up with like the west coast of Ireland with a bungalow in every field and no countryside.
Charles, what about that?
Well, of course, you don't have to have absolutely no restrictions on building. I don't think anybody would argue for that. But I think it's clear that what you're getting now is such restriction, particularly obviously in things like national parks, but virtually everywhere, that what we speak of as rural England doesn't really exist anymore. And what I mean by that is that people are not making a living in it. It's becoming a place for people to retire to, or if they're better off, to commute from. And it's not a place where there are thriving schools, there are shops, there are things going on in the village, and this is about life, and everything in the landscape that we so love in England is in fact to do with human achievement and human work and people making a living and making money. That's why the fields and the hedges exist. That's why the woods are as they are, and so on.
Yeah.
And it's the same with rural industry, such as mining. Terribly important. And if all these things are discouraged and sat upon, and above all the power of delay, we're just about to build a new village school and 15 houses near where I'm speaking to you from. And in the time it's taken, the arguments with the planners going on, cities of 12 million people have gone up in China. And this has meant that the opportunities for young people and poorer people in this village have been stifled for a generation. This is just a minor example.
And Shaun, you can't deny that villages are dying, aren't they?
And I don't also deny that we need more affordable housing in the countryside. We've been arguing that for a very long time. And actually, we put Nick Bowles' speech on our website. A lot of it we would agree with. But as a blogger said today on a website, Nick Bowles, it was like Nick Bowles coming to the WI and telling them how to make jam. It was, we don't disagree with that. The reason there was such irritation was the sense that actually Nick Bowles is in denial about what's really happening out there, the extent to which local communities are getting overridden by big developers, the extent to which very appropriate brownfield sites within towns are being rejected by the builders and there's sprawl outside. And really what we were saying to him is get real. What you want to happen and what we want to happen isn't happening.
Thank you very much, Shaun Spiers from the Campaign to Protect Rural England, and Charles Moore, the former editor of The Telegraph, a columnist for The Spectator, talking about Nick Bowles and planning.